The small coastal town of Riverside was known for its breathtaking ocean views, friendly locals, and tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's business. On this particular Saturday in June, the town was buzzing with excitement. The historic St. Augustine's Church, with its tall white steeple and stained glass windows that had witnessed generations of marriages, was decorated with white roses and baby's breath for what everyone called the wedding of the year. Maria Chen had grown up in Riverside. Her parents owned the local bakery where townspeople gathered each morning for fresh bread and gossip. At 32, Maria had become a kindergarten teacher at the same school she once attended as a child. The children adored her for her patience and the creative ways she taught them to read and count. Parents often requested her class specifically, knowing their little ones would thrive under her care. James Wilson had moved to Riverside about 5 years ago. Handsome and well-dressed, he quickly became popular in town after joining the local accounting firm. His charm won people over instantly. He remembered everyone's names, asked about their families, and always offered to help with community events. When he met Maria at a beach cleanup event organized by the town council, sparks flew immediately. He looks at her like she hung the moon and stars. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the flower shop, told anyone who would listen. Their courtship had been straight out of a romance novel. Surprise picnics by the lighthouse, dancing under the stars at the town's summer festival, and James's proposal during the annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony, which had the entire town cheering. Their engagement party at Maria's parents' bakery had been packed with well-wishers. Maria's father, normally a quiet man, had tears in his eyes as he raised a toast to the couple. "In all my years," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I've never seen my daughter so happy." As the wedding approached, Maria's best friend Lily helped with all the preparations. They had been inseparable since elementary school, sharing secrets and dreams over ice cream cones and later coffee. Lily noticed small changes in Maria during the engagement. She seemed more distant, canceled their regular coffee dates, and always had an excuse ready. "James needs help with the house," Maria would say, or "We're meeting with the wedding planner." When Lily brought up her concerns, Maria brushed them off with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're being silly. I'm just busy with wedding stuff." The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunshine streaming through, fluffy white clouds, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water and blooming jasmine. The church was filled with 200 guests, many of whom had watched Maria grow from a pigtailed girl chasing butterflies to the poised woman in a vintage lace gown that had belonged to her grandmother. Maria's mother fussed over the dress in the church's bridal room, carefully adjusting the delicate veil. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered, blinking back tears. "She always said this dress was lucky. She and your grandfather were married for 62 years. Maria smiled, but her eyes darted nervously to her phone every few minutes. 3 text messages from James remained unanswered. In another room of the church, Father Thomas was preparing for the ceremony. At 73, he had officiated hundreds of weddings, but this one felt different. The letter he had received 3 weeks ago weighed heavily on his mind. Its contents had led him down a troubling path of discovery, each revelation more concerning than the last. The church bells rang at exactly 2 p.m., signaling the start of the ceremony. Guests settled into the wooden pews, programs fluttering like butterfly wings as they fanned themselves in the warm church. James stood at the altar looking every bit the proud groom in his tailored suit. His parents, who had flown in from out of state, beamed from the front row. His best man, a college friend named David, shifted nervously beside him, occasionally checking his watch. The organist began playing the traditional wedding march, and all heads turned toward the back of the church. Maria appeared on her father's arm, her dark hair swept up with tiny white flowers tucked into the elegant updo. A collective sigh rippled through the crowd. She was stunning. As Maria walked down the aisle, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. Her third-grade teacher who had taught her to love books, neighbors who had watched her grow up, cousins who had traveled from across the country. Each step brought her closer to James, whose smile widened as she approached. Father Thomas began the ceremony with warm words about love and commitment. "Marriage," he said, his voice carrying through the church, is not to be entered into lightly. It requires honesty, trust, and a deep respect for one another. Was it Maria's imagination, or did Father Thomas look directly at James when he emphasized the word honesty? She pushed the thought away and focused on James's hands holding hers. The ceremony continued smoothly until they reached the critical moment. If anyone knows any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, Father Thomas said, following the traditional script, speak now or forever, hold your peace. The church fell silent. Then, to everyone's shock, Father Thomas himself cleared his throat. I must, he began, his voice shaking slightly. He looked at Maria, whose eyes had widened in confusion. I must stop these proceedings. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people sat frozen in disbelief. Maria's mother gasped audibly. James's face drained of color. I would like to speak with the bride and groom privately, Father, Thomas said firmly, picking up a folder from beside his Bible. Please join me in the vestry. As Father Thomas led the stunned couple toward the side door of the church, whispers erupted like wildfire throughout the pews. No one in Riverside would soon forget the day when Father Thomas stopped a wedding just before the vows were exchanged. The morning mail arrived at St. Augustine's Church 3 weeks before the wedding. Father Thomas sorted through the usual assortment of bills, church newsletters, and donation requests at his wooden desk. Among them was a plain white envelope, with no return address, just his name and the church address written in careful block letters. Another anonymous prayer request, he thought, opening it with his brass letter opener, a gift from his parish on his 20th anniversary as their priest. But as he unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, his heart began to race. Dear Father Thomas, the letter began, I know you are set to marry Maria Chen and James Wilson next month. I cannot come forward publicly, but there are things about James that Maria deserves to know before she commits her life to him. Please look into his past job at Westfield Accounting in Harbor City. Ask about why he really left. Check his credit history. For Maria's sake, please investigate before it's too late. Father Thomas read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. In his 45 years as a priest, he had received similar letters before. Sometimes they came from jealous ex-partners or disapproving family members trying to stop a wedding. Often, they contained nothing but spiteful lies. Lord, give me wisdom, he whispered, looking up at the simple wooden cross on his wall. He had baptized Maria as a baby, given her first communion, and watched her grow into a kind-hearted young woman. He couldn't ignore the letter, but neither could he disrupt a wedding based on anonymous accusations. That afternoon, instead of taking his usual walk along the shoreline, Father Thomas drove to the town library. Nancy, the librarian who had worked there since before computers arrived, smiled as he entered. Research for Sunday's sermon, Father? She asked, helping him navigate the library's computer system. Just checking some facts, he replied vaguely. For 2 hours he searched online for information about Westfield Accounting in Harbor City. The company's website listed their staff, but James wasn't among them. There was no mention of him in their About Us section either, though according to what James had told everyone, he had been a senior accountant there before moving to Riverside for a better opportunity. The next day, Father Thomas called Westfield Accounting, claiming to be verifying employment for a loan application. The receptionist transferred him to Human Resources. Yes, James Wilson worked here from 2019 to 2022, the HR manager confirmed. Then, after a pause, I'm not supposed to say more than dates of employment, but since you're helping with a loan, I'd recommend calling our legal department. Father, Thomas's stomach tightened. May I ask why? The woman sighed. Let's just say his departure wasn't exactly voluntary, and there were some client accounts with irregularities. That evening, during his weekly dinner with Dr. Wong, the town's only dentist and his chess partner for 15 years, Father Thomas carefully brought up the subject. That young accountant, James Wilson, do you know much about him? Dr. Wong moved his bishop across the chessboard. Nice fellow, handles my business taxes. Why do you ask? Just curious about his background. He mentioned working at Westfield Accounting before coming here. Dr. Wong nodded. Yes, he said he left for better opportunities, though. He hesitated, lowering his voice despite being alone. In the rectory, between us, I found it odd when he suggested I could write off personal expenses as business costs. Nothing illegal, he said, just gray areas everyone uses. I didn't feel comfortable with it. With each passing day, Father Thomas's concerns grew. He visited the county courthouse and discovered James had a small claims judgment against him in Harbor City for unpaid rent. A careful conversation with the bank manager, under the guise of discussing church finances, revealed James had applied for several loans recently. Most troubling was his conversation with Lily, Maria's childhood friend. He ran into her at the grocery store looking tired and sad. I haven't seen you and Maria together much lately, he commented as they both examined tomatoes in the produce section. Lily's eyes welled up unexpectedly. She's always busy now. James needs her help with something or they have wedding plans. She hesitated, then added in a whisper, Father, is it normal for someone to check their partner's phone? James always knows where Maria is, who she's talking to. He jokes about it, but the pieces were coming together, forming a picture that kept Father Thomas awake at night. Still, he had no absolute proof, just concerning patterns. He prayed for guidance, wondering if he was overstepping his boundaries. 10 days before the wedding, he received another anonymous letter. This one contained a copy of a marriage certificate from Nevada, showing James had married a woman named Patricia Taylor 5 years ago. There was no record of a divorce. Father Thomas sat at his desk, head in his hands. The church couldn't marry someone already wed to another. More importantly, Maria deserved to know the truth about the man she planned to spend her life with. But how could he tell her without breaking her heart? He tried calling James directly, hoping for an explanation, but his calls went straight to voicemail. A carefully worded email asking to meet to discuss some paperwork for the ceremony received a brief reply. Very busy with work. Can we handle it right before the rehearsal? Father Thomas consulted his old seminary friend, now a Monsignor in the next county. You have a pastoral duty to both of them, his friend advised, but especially to protect Maria from entering a potentially invalid and harmful marriage. The day before the wedding, Father Thomas made one final attempt to reach James privately. He drove to the accounting firm where James worked and asked to see him. The receptionist looked confused. James called in sick today, she said. Something about final wedding preparations. As Father Thomas turned to leave, he overheard two co-workers talking by the coffee machine. Did you see those credit card charges James submitted for the Johnson account? Over $5,000 for consulting fees to some company I've never heard of. Shh. The boss is looking into it. Don't spread rumors before the wedding. That night, Father Thomas placed all his findings in a folder. His hands shook as he wrote a note to attach to the front. Evidence suggesting James Wilson is not who he claims to be. As he prepared for bed, the weight of what he must do the next day pressed down on him like a physical burden. Stopping a wedding was virtually unheard of, especially by the officiating priest himself. People would be shocked, angry, confused. But as he knelt for his evening prayers, he knew he had no choice. Some truths, painful though they might be, needed to come to light. Father Thomas sat at his desk in the church office, surrounded by papers and notes from his investigation. The manila folder before him had grown thicker over the past week as he pieced together the troubling puzzle of James Wilson's past. With each new discovery, the weight on his conscience grew heavier. His first real breakthrough came when he contacted a former colleague of James at Westfield Accounting. The woman who asked not to be named spoke hesitantly at first. I wasn't planning to say anything, she told Father Thomas over the phone. It's not my business anymore, but if someone's future is at stake. She paused, then continued. James wasn't let go because of downsizing like he told everyone. There were discrepancies in client accounts he managed, nothing the company could definitively prove, but patterns that raised serious red flags. Father Thomas made careful notes, his handwriting more rushed than usual. Was he fired officially? He was given the choice to resign or be terminated. The company didn't press charges. They wanted to avoid bad publicity, and most clients didn't. Noticed the small inconsistencies. But some of us wondered where he'd go next. This conversation led Father Thomas to contact the State Accountancy Board, where he learned James's CPA license was under review for ethical concerns. The clerk couldn't share specifics, but suggested Father Thomas check court records in Harbor. The next day, despite his arthritic knee acting up in the damp weather, Father Thomas drove the 40 miles to Harbor City's courthouse. What he found made his heart sink further. Beyond the unpaid rent judgment he already knew about, there were 2 restraining orders from women James had dated before Maria. One complaint described controlling behavior, financial manipulation, and isolation from friends and family. On his drive back to Riverside, Father Thomas stopped at a small diner for coffee, his mind racing. He noticed a familiar face, Grace, who had graduated high school with Maria and moved away years ago. She recognized him immediately. "Father Thomas, what brings you all the way out here?" He explained he was doing research for church business. The conversation drifted to the upcoming wedding, and Grace's expression changed. "I saw the announcement in the Riverside Gazette online." "I was surprised," she said, stirring her coffee, slowly. "James dated my roommate when he lived here. It didn't end well." "How so?" Father Thomas asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Grace lowered her voice. "He borrowed money she never got back. Thousands of dollars, said it was for a business investment. When she asked about it after they broke up, he threatened to share private photos of her." She shook her head. She was too embarrassed to go to the police. Back in Riverside, Father Thomas made his most disturbing discovery yet. After speaking with the church secretary in a neighboring town, he confirmed James had been attending pre-marriage counseling sessions there with a different woman just 6 months ago. They had set a wedding date but suddenly called it off. The secretary remembered because the woman had been upset about losing her deposit on the venue. Father Thomas tried to reconcile these findings with the charming man everyone in town had embraced. How could someone hide their true nature so effectively? His concern for Maria grew by the hour. A conversation with Mr. Chen, Maria's father, added another piece to the puzzle. They spoke after daily mass, which Mr. Chen had attended faithfully for decades. "Maria seems different lately," Father Thomas mentioned carefully. The older man nodded, worry lines deepening around his eyes. "She doesn't visit the bakery much anymore. When I asked if everything was okay, she said James thinks she needs to watch her weight before the wedding." He shook his head. "My daughter was never worried about such things before." The pattern was becoming clearer. Isolation, control, financial irregularities. Father Thomas reached out to Lily again, this time inviting her to the church under the pretense of discussing the floral arrangements. "When did you and Maria start drifting apart?" he asked gently. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "After she and James got serious. At first he was charming, even to me. Then he started making small remarks, that I was keeping Maria out too late, that I was a bad influence because I'm single. He'd text her constantly when we were together." She wiped her eyes. "Last month she canceled our lunch plans because James surprised her with a picnic. When I saw them in town later, he was scolding her for buying an expensive dress without asking him first. It wasn't even expensive, and it's her money. She looked so small, Father." 2 days before the wedding, Father Thomas received confirmation of his worst fear. A court clerk from Nevada returned his call, verifying that James Wilson had indeed married Patricia Taylor 5 years ago. There was no record of divorce in that jurisdiction. Further calls to surrounding counties yielded nothing. That evening, Father Thomas tried one last time to speak with James, driving to the rental home he shared with Maria. Only Maria was there, surrounded by wedding gifts and looking exhausted. "James is out with his friends," she explained. "Bachelor party." Father Thomas noticed how she glanced at her phone, how nervous she seemed. "Maria, is everything all right?" You know you can talk to me about anything." For a moment, something flickered. In her eyes, doubt, fear. But then she smiled brightly. "Of course. Just wedding nerves. Everyone gets them, right?" As he left, Father Thomas saw a credit card bill on the counter, addressed to Maria, but opened. The balance was over $15,000. Next to it lay loan paperwork in Maria's name. Back at the church, Father Thomas organized all his evidence into sections: financial concerns, relationship patterns, legal issues, and the existing marriage. He included contact information for each source. As he worked late into the night, he prayed for guidance, for courage, and most of all for Maria. He knew stopping the wedding would cause a scandal. People might question his judgment or authority. The Chen family would be embarrassed. James's family would be furious. But allowing Maria to marry a man who was not only potentially still married, but showed clear signs of being financially and emotionally abusive would be a far greater wrong. The morning of the wedding arrived sunny and clear. Father Thomas barely noticed the beautiful weather as he placed the folder in his Bible, where he could access it quickly during the ceremony. His hands trembled slightly as he put on his vestments. In 45 years of priesthood, he had never done anything like what he planned to do today. "Give me strength," he whispered as the first guests began to arrive. He greeted them with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, his mind focused on the moment that was quickly approaching, when he would have to stand before everyone and stop a wedding that the entire town had been eagerly anticipating for months. The day of Maria and James's wedding arrived with perfect June weather. St. Augustine's Church stood beautifully decorated with white roses, delicate baby's breath, and flowing ribbons along the pews. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden floors where generations of Riverside families had celebrated life's most important moments. By 1 o'clock, guests began arriving in their finest clothes. Women in flowing dresses and men in pressed suits greeted each other with excitement. Maria's kindergarten students came with their parents, clutching handmade cards and giggling about seeing their teacher as a princess. James's co-workers clustered together near the back, whispering and occasionally glancing toward the church entrance. In the small room off the main sanctuary, Father Thomas knelt in prayer, his white vestments crisp against his weathered skin. The folder containing his findings sat on a small table beside him, each page representing a piece of the troubling puzzle he had assembled over the past 3 weeks. "Lord, give me courage to do what is right," he whispered. His hands trembled, slightly, not from his arthritis but from the weight of what he was about to do. In his 45 years as a priest, he had never faced such a difficult moment. In the bridal room, Maria sat before an antique mirror as her mother gently placed the delicate veil over her dark hair. The dress, carefully preserved from her grandmother's wedding 60 years ago, fit perfectly after months of alterations. "You look beautiful," her mother said, voice catching, "just like grandmother in the old pictures." Maria smiled, but her eyes seemed distant. She checked her phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "Everything okay?" her mother asked. "Yes, just making sure James got here on time." Maria's voice sounded higher than usual. "He went out with his friends last night and wasn't home when I called this morning." Her mother patted her shoulder. "Men get nervous too. He's probably with his best man getting ready." Across the church in the groom's room, James adjusted his tie and checked his reflection with satisfaction. His best man, Paul, looked uncomfortable. "Did you talk to Father Thomas?" Paul asked quietly. "He's been trying to reach you all week." James waved dismissively. "Just some paperwork thing, nothing important." "And that woman who called you yesterday? The one from Nevada?" James's face hardened momentarily before relaxing into his practiced smile. "Wrong number. Forget about it." He clapped Paul on the shoulder. "Ready to stand by me on the biggest day of my life?" By 2 o'clock, the church was filled to capacity. The Chen family sat proudly in the front row on the left side. Maria's parents, her elderly grandmother in a wheelchair, 2 aunts who had flown in from overseas. On the right side, James's family looked slightly uncomfortable. His parents, whom few in town had met before today, smiled politely at everyone. The organist began playing soft music as the wedding party entered. First the groomsmen in matching suits, then the bridesmaids in pale blue dresses. Lily, serving as maid of honor despite the distance that had grown between her and Maria, blinked back tears as she walked down the aisle. Father Thomas took his position at the altar. He clutched his Bible, feeling the edge of the folder inside. James stepped forward looking confident and handsome, smiling at guests as he took his place. The music changed to the traditional wedding march. Everyone stood and turned toward the back of the church. Maria appeared on her father's arm, looking radiant despite the hint of exhaustion in her eyes. Her father, emotional and proud, patted her hand as they began the slow walk forward. As Maria approached, James's smile widened. There was something possessive in his gaze that made Father Thomas's resolve strengthen. The priest noted how Maria's steps slowed slightly as she neared the altar, how her father seemed reluctant to let go of her arm. Dearly beloved Father, Thomas began once everyone was seated, his voice steady despite his racing heart. We are gathered here today in the sight of God and this community to join Maria Chen and James Wilson in holy matrimony. He continued with the familiar words of the ceremony, watching the couple closely. James stood tall and confident. Maria's smile seemed fixed, her eyes occasionally darting to James's face as if checking his reaction. Father Thomas spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about honesty and trust. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, he emphasized, looking directly at James, but with careful consideration and respect. The ceremony proceeded to the exchange of vows. Father Thomas's heart pounded as he approached the critical moment. If anyone knows any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, he said, the traditional words feeling heavier than ever before. Speak now or forever. Hold your peace. The church fell silent. 200 people waited through the customary pause, expecting nothing but the continuation of the beautiful ceremony. Father Thomas took a deep breath. I must, he began, his voice ringing clearly through the stunned silence. I must stop these proceedings. A collective gasp filled the church. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. James's confident smile vanished, replaced by a flash of anger quickly masked by confusion. Father, Maria whispered, her voice trembling. I have reason to believe, Father Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger, that this marriage cannot lawfully proceed. I ask that the bride and groom join me in the vestry immediately. Murmurs erupted throughout the congregation. Maria's mother half rose from her seat, steadied by her husband's hand. James's parents exchanged alarmed glances. This is ridiculous, James said loudly enough for the front rows to hear. What are you doing? Father Thomas remained calm. Please, James. Maria, come with me now. As the shocked couple followed him toward the vestry door, Father Thomas nodded to Lily. The maid of honor should join us, he added, knowing Maria would need support. The small room off the main sanctuary felt cramped with the four of them inside. Father Thomas placed his Bible on the table and removed the folder. What is this about? James demanded, his charm completely gone now. You're ruining everything. Father, please, Maria pleaded, tears threatening to spill. What's happening? Father Thomas looked directly at her. Maria, I received information that led me to investigate James's background. What I found disturbs me greatly. He opened the folder. James Wilson is already married. That's a lie, James shouted, stepping toward the priest. I have verification from the Clark County Courthouse in Nevada, Father Thomas continued steadily. You married Patricia Taylor 5 years ago. There is no record of divorce. The color drained from Maria's face. She turned to James. Is this true? Of course not. It's some kind of mistake, James insisted, but his eyes darted to the folder. Someone with the same name. There's more, Father Thomas said. He gently laid out the other discoveries, the circumstances of James's departure from his previous job, the financial irregularities, the restraining orders, the pattern of isolating behavior. As each revelation came to light, Maria seemed to shrink into herself. Lily moved closer, putting an arm around her friend's shoulders. "These are all lies," James insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Who told you these things? I demand to know." "Multiple sources confirmed independently," Father Thomas replied. "People concerned for Maria's well-being." "Maria, you don't believe this nonsense, do you?" James turned to her, his voice softening to the charming tone everyone in town knew well. "We can sort this out. It's just a misunderstanding." Maria stared at him, years of trust battling with the evidence before her. She looked down at her engagement ring, then at the papers showing James's marriage to another woman. "The credit card," she said quietly, "the one with $15,000 on it. You said it was for our honeymoon surprise." "It is. I was going to tell you. And the loan papers in my name for the house down payment? You said your money was tied up in investments." James's expression hardened. "So you're going to believe some old man with a folder over the man you're about to marry? After everything I've done for you?" Father Thomas watched as something changed in Maria's eyes. A recognition, perhaps, of a truth she had been pushing away. "What have you done for me, James?" she asked softly. "You've pulled me away from my friends. You've criticized my clothes, my weight, how I spend my money, which you've been borrowing more and more of." Her voice grew stronger. "You checked my phone. You got angry when I wanted to visit my cousin without you." James's face darkened. "You ungrateful—" "That's enough," Father Thomas interrupted firmly. "James, I believe you should leave the church. Now." For a moment, James looked like he might refuse. Then, with a final glare at Maria, he stormed out of the vestry through the side door, avoiding the sanctuary filled with waiting guests. Maria collapsed into a chair, her wedding dress billowing around her. "What do I tell everyone?" she whispered, tears flowing freely now. Father Thomas knelt before her despite his aching joints. "The truth. That the wedding cannot proceed due to legal complications. Nothing more needs to be said today." Lily squeezed her friend's hand. "I'm here. We're all here for you." Maria looked up at Father Thomas, her eyes red but clearer than they had been in months. "Thank you," she said simply. "How did you know?" "God works in mysterious ways," the elderly priest replied. "Sometimes he sends us letters without return addresses." Word spread quickly through the small town of Riverside about what people were calling the wedding that wasn't. By Monday morning, the bakery owned by Maria's parents had more customers than usual, all pretending they needed fresh bread while hoping to catch a glimpse of the family or hear some gossip. Maria stayed in her childhood bedroom for 3 days after the wedding day, Venetian blinds drawn tight against curious eyes. Her mother brought up trays of food that returned barely touched. Her father fielded phone calls from concerned friends and family, politely but firmly telling them Maria wasn't ready to talk. "She needs time," he explained again and again. "We all do." On the 4th day, Maria finally emerged, pale but composed. She sat at the kitchen table where she had done homework as a child, where she had celebrated countless birthdays, where her parents had taught her to roll dough for the bakery's famous cinnamon buns. "I need to thank Father Thomas," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "He saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Her mother squeezed her hand. "He's been calling daily to check on you." That afternoon, Maria walked to St. Augustine's Church for the first time since her almost wedding. People on the street tried not to stare, but she felt their eyes following her, heard their whispers as she passed. The church was quiet, smelling of incense and furniture polish, the same comforting scent it had held throughout her childhood. Father Thomas was tending to the altar flowers when she entered. Despite his age, he still insisted on arranging them, himself claiming it helped him think. "Maria," he said warmly, setting down his pruning shears, "I'm so glad to see you up and about." "I came to say thank you," she said simply, taking a seat in the front pew. "And to ask how you knew. About James, I mean." Father Thomas sat beside her, his knees cracking slightly as he lowered himself. "Someone sent me an anonymous letter," he explained. "At first I thought it might be jealousy or gossip, but something about it felt genuine, so I started asking questions. And found out everything," Maria finished, shaking her head in disbelief. "A wife in Nevada. The money problems. The lies. You're not the first person he's deceived," Father Thomas said gently, "and probably not the last. Men like James are skilled at making people trust them." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. "I feel so stupid." "No," Father Thomas said firmly. "Not stupid. Trusting. Loving. Those are virtues, Maria, not flaws. James is the one who should feel ashamed, not you." Over the next few weeks, the truth about James Wilson continued to unfold. He had left town immediately after the wedding was called off, clearing out his apartment in the middle of the night. The accounting firm where he worked discovered several client accounts with missing funds. His rental car was found abandoned at the airport. For Maria, each new revelation was both painful and freeing. With Lily's help, she sorted through the financial mess James had left behind. The credit card debt in her name, the loan applications, the missing jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. "He was planning this all along," Lily said as they worked through a stack of bank statements at Maria's kitchen table. "Getting your name on accounts, taking out loans. He must have been planning to leave right after the wedding." Maria nodded. "With all the wedding gifts and whatever else he could take." The hurt was still there, but now mixed with anger. A healthier emotion, her therapist assured her. The most surprising aftermath came in the form of a visitor, 3 weeks after the non-wedding. Patricia Taylor, James's legal wife from Nevada, arrived in Riverside looking for answers. "I saw a social media post about your wedding being called off," she explained when she and Maria met for coffee at the town's only cafe. "The picture showed James, though I knew him as Jason. I nearly fell off my chair." Patricia's story was painfully similar to Maria's. A whirlwind romance, increasing isolation from friends and family, unexplained financial issues. "He disappeared 4 years ago with my savings in my car," she said. "I've been trying to track him down ever since, both for divorce papers and to press charges." The two women, united by their shared experience, formed an unlikely friendship. Together with Father Thomas, they pieced together James's pattern of deception across 3 different states under various names. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Maria stood before a room of 30 people at the community center. What had begun as a small support group for her had grown into a twice-monthly meeting for anyone who had experienced controlling relationships or financial abuse. "I didn't see the warning signs," she told the group, her voice stronger now. "Or maybe I saw them but didn't want to believe them. That's how these people work. They make you doubt yourself, isolate you from those who might help you see the truth." In the back row, Father Thomas listened proudly. At 84, he didn't get out to evening events often anymore, but he never missed Maria's meetings. Next to him sat Lily, now working on a website to help others identify the warning signs of financial abuse. The Chen family bakery became a safe haven for women in similar situations. Maria's mother always had a fresh cup of tea and a sympathetic ear ready for anyone who came in looking troubled. Her father offered jobs to 2 women trying to rebuild their lives after controlling relationships. As for James Wilson, or whatever his real name was, he surfaced briefly in another state where he began dating a wealthy widow before disappearing when the authorities got close. His trail went cold after that, but Maria no longer spent energy wondering about him. 1 year to the day after the stopped wedding, Maria hosted a celebration of freedom party. The same church hall that would have held her wedding reception was filled with friends, family, and members of her support group. Instead of a white dress, she wore vibrant blue. Instead of wedding gifts, guests brought donations for a new nonprofit Maria had started to help victims of financial abuse. Father Thomas, looking frail but happy, raised a glass of sparkling cider for a toast. "To truth," he said, his voice still carrying the strength that had stopped a wedding and saved a life a year earlier. "May it always find a way to come to light." As everyone clinked glasses, Maria caught his eye and smiled gratefully. Sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most profound healing. The wedding that never happened had become the beginning of a journey she never expected, one of recovery, purpose, and helping others find their way back to themselves. To truth, she echoed, raising her glass higher. And to second chances.